Good morning, everybody. Well, like I told the worship group this morning, I was fully expecting a little less of a crowd, but that's kind of exciting to me. Some of the best services I've been in have been when externally I think that it's not going to be good because there's not a big crowd. And somehow God always speaks to me in a different way, and those are usually the best services. So everyone that missed, you just do that to them. Um, well, yeah, as Shanna said, the Birkins are out. Last time I spoke, the Birkins were out, and I when I make jokes that aren't in my notes, they're always bad. Okay, and I started off the sermon. I said, "Well, the Birkins aren't here; they're gone." And then in my head, I thought, that sounds kind of morbid. Like, that sounds bad. So my brain was like, hurry, say a joke or something so it's not awkward. And I was like, they are in heaven. And then my brain was like, nope, that was not the joke. That was not a good joke. That made it more awkward. So I had to try to cover my tracks. I'm going to try to refrain from saying jokes that aren't in my notes because it never goes well. But anyways, I just want to talk to you this morning. I want God not only to speak to me, but to speak to you through me. I did a lot of praying this morning. I woke up really early to work on this sermon and to try to get the best message that God has for us. So I just want to pray this morning that we wouldn't let anything take our energy or our focus away from today, just so that we can really just absorb what he has for us. So, dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this opportunity to hear your word, God, to focus on what it means to us, God, that we would put it into light, into action, and then we would begin living it out. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, well, at my current job, I work with a lot of kids now, and although every day of my life I've had to deal with people reacting to me, it gets old. But there's something about when kids react to me, it always keeps me on my toes. That's always something different. Sometimes it's pretty funny. One time I was with my buddy Chris Poss. He's a big old dude, okay? He's like 6 foot something, pretty stout guy. He looks like maybe Goliath, I don't know. And we were at Taco Bell one time, and I can always tell when a kid is perplexed by what they see. You can just see it on their face. And the kid we were sitting there eating, and the kid goes, Mama, Mom, 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 Mom. And she was like, what? And he's like, big, little, big, little. And so I got a kick out of that. Just recently, about a month ago, I was in someone's house visiting with them, and one of the children came up to me. It was a little girl about 3 years old, and I could tell as soon as I saw her, the confusion on her face as she saw me. She didn't know what was happening. She was like, you're little, but tall. Like, I could just tell she didn't have the words to explain what she was seeing. She just, for the next, 30 minutes that I was there, she would be doing something distracted, and then she'd see me again. She'd be like, you're little, but tall. So it's pretty funny. It's moments like that kind of break up the monotony of my day. And I've been through a lot of phases of dealing with people's reactions to me. I've been through ups and downs of how I've dealt with it, how I've perceived it. There's been a lot of times, especially younger times in my life, I was confused. A lot of confusion by why this was happening to me, why I was like this, why people reacted the way they did. I went through times of anger, sometimes even recently, times of anger from people reacting certain ways. There have been times I've tried to embrace it, tried to be like, all right, this is how I am. I'm going to flaunt it, Those times don't usually last very long because that's kind of a strange way for me to look at it. There have been times where I've had really low lows, just been depressed by where I'm at in life. There have been times where I've tried to just be numb to it, just not let it get to me at all, just be like impenetrable. There have times I've avoided thinking about it. I'll just distract myself with the things of life. Just try to do something to get my mind off of it. But in the end, I've just had to learn to accept it. I've had to learn to accept that this is how I am, and this is how, people are going to react to me in all kinds of different ways. And my journey of self-confidence and contentment with who I am, it's always been kind of a roller coaster. And unfortunately, it's been very similar to my Christian walk. My spiritual identity has somewhat mirrored my actual way that I view myself. At times I've been confused by God and his plan for me. I've been confused by things that are in his word. I've been so confused that I walk away sometimes because it doesn't make sense to my brain, so obviously it can't be true, right? There have been times I've been angry with God. There have been times where I try to blindly embrace the path of Christ. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to not really think about anything, and I'm going to try to live for God and not think about anything. That doesn't work either. There have been times where it's been a factor in my sadness. There's been times that I've just altogether tried avoiding his call on my life and what he wants from me. You see, from the moment I first started attending church as a child, I've always been under the impression that accepting Christ would change me. It would change every aspect of my life. It would change all the interactions I had with everyone. It would change how I feel. I was under the impression, because we're kind of told in church that accepting Christ is like the answer, in the sense of almost like life is just all downhill after that. There are so many aspects of living for God that are expected and assumed to be automatic just by saying, I'm a Christian now. One assumption in particular that has haunted me throughout my Christian experiences is the assumption of the changed life. The assumption that just because I call myself a Christian, that now my life is changed. I was taught that if I was a Christian, people would see a marked difference in my life. Just by saying that I accepted Christ into my heart, that automatically everything would change. That we could walk in a room and everyone would go, oh, he loves Jesus. I'm going to change everything about me because of him. Obviously that's a little overboard, but that's kind of how it's explained to us sometimes. I was taught that the closer I was to God, whatever that means, the more spiritual I was. And the more spiritual I was, the greater and more visible difference I would make. I believe that by default, Christianity would change you outside, not just inside. I've heard so many times, I've heard it, I've even said it, that when we truly have Christ in our heart, we will be different. That people will see something different about us, that we walk in and change a room, that we are a light in the darkness. And that's often alluded to by just saying, I'm a Christian now. I choose to follow God. And because of that assumption, that things in our life will change and happen just based off of deciding to live for God, because of that, genuine spiritual transformation is missing. Genuinely changing who we are, our makeup, our faults, our fleshly nature, all of that sort of gets faded into this mystical magic thing that, I serve God, boom, everything's good now. The genuine spiritual transformation is missing in many churches because failure in the pursuit of it has caused us to settle for less. People aren't experiencing true transformation. And there are two reasons for this, I believe. Two common counterfeits that is passed off as true transformation. The first one is settling for the minimum. Sometimes we mistakenly think that the Christian life is primarily about getting into heaven. We're content with conversion when actually God is calling for transformation. Rather than expecting the kingdom of God to revolutionize lives today, sometimes we subconsciously think, well, I just have to make it to heaven. And if I make it to heaven, then everything will be good. And I'll transform into this heavenly being to where everything is like it's supposed to be. Somewhere along the line, we swapped out Jesus' gospel, that through him we can be transformed right now, today, and we've traded it for a gospel of heaven's minimum entrance requirements. Many people's idea of the gospel is that someday we'll get to the gates of heaven and we'll be asked, all right, why should you be allowed to enter? And as long as we answer correctly, then we'll be able to go inside the gates. And for many, that answer will be, well, I was a good person. I accepted Jesus, and I was a good person. But that isn't exactly what the gospel tells us. Jesus never said, now I'm going to tell you what you need to say to get into heaven when you die. The gospel writers make it clear that Jesus' good news was that we no longer have to live in the guilt, the failure, and the impotence of our own strength. We don't have to live like that. The transforming presence and power of God is available through Christ right here, right now. You don't have to wait to get to heaven before you become a new being. To live in that power, we must become his disciples. So that's kind of the first misconception of transformation is just you just have to do the bare minimum. And then as long as you do that, you get into heaven. And as long as you're in heaven, you don't have to worry about changing. See how easy that is? That's great. The second misconception is only looking the part. A second counterfeit form of spiritual maturity is outward appearance. It always confused me that a lot of the writing in the Old Testament, the first century rabbinic writing, focused so much on dietary law and circumcision and keeping the Sabbath. It always confused me that there was a lot of writing about those. I was like, why would the rabbis spend so much time on these ancillary aspects of faith, these things that are, until God showed me something about church. You see, all groups want to define who is in the group and who's out. It just happens. Groups tend to establish boundary markers to make this distinction. Sociologists define these markers as highly visible, relatively superficial practices, like dietary laws and Sabbath customs. So basically, as a sociologist would say, these boundary markers are what became everyone's sort of checkpoints to saying, I'm a Christian because I did this and this. Because I do this, because the rabbis tell me to, I'm a Christian. Boundary markers. Conforming to boundary markers too often substitutes for authentic transformation. You're not really changed just because you do these couple things that you think are what it takes to be a Christian. I've attended several churches, especially early on in my life, that were all about boundary markers. A prideful or resentful leader could keep their position even if they were prideful or resentful. But if they were caught smoking a cigarette, you're out. And it's not because everyone in the church thought, oh, smoking cigarettes is the worst thing you can do. It's because that was a boundary marker. Like, if you smoke, obviously, you're in that subculture, and we can't accept that. You can't be a leader here. And that's a boundary marker. They could be struggling with all sorts of kind of things, but that's a boundary marker, or at least, it was in some of the churches I've been to. As I was growing up, having a quiet time became a personal boundary marker for me. A measure of spiritual growth. So if someone asked me about my spiritual life, my initial instinct was to not think about, well, how well am I loving God and loving people? My first instinct was, I haven't been reading the Bible much. I haven't been spending a lot of quiet time, so I'm not doing too good. Or the opposite. Yeah, I've been reading my Bible a lot. Everything's A-okay. That was my boundary marker. That was the thing I looked to and said, yep, I'm doing okay. I'm doing good. Boundary markers change from culture to culture, but the dynamic remains the same. If people do not experience authentic transformation, then their faith will deteriorate into a search for the boundary markers that masquerade as evidence of a changed life. People are going to be just considering these things they think make them a Christian, make them a better person, and they're going to be chasing after those things instead of chasing after God. I'm going to be transparent with you. I've had a lot of boundary markers throughout my Christian walk. One of the first ones, my first major boundary marker that I wrote down, I didn't really write down, but if I wrote them all down, this would be the first one, was not cussing. I thought that is the biggest boundary marker. That's how you know that someone is a Christian, because they don't cuss. So because of that big idea, in my junior high, I went around, and anytime I heard a cuss word, I had substitute words. So if someone said a bad word, I would run up to them, and I say, no, you say fudge. And they'd be like, what? I don't even know you. I'm like, you better say it. I run up and say, no, you say shoot. You don't say that other word. And they'd be like, what? You're not even in this conversation. But because of that, I thought I was like changing the world. That was my boundary marker. I thought that being a Christian was about not cussing, basically. And as long as I could make people not cuss, I was converting them all. Ooh, they were all going to be preachers. Another thing was not listening to secular music. I thought, man, I'm holy because I don't listen to those bad songs. I only listen to Christian music. And I would look down on people that listen to anything else. That was a boundary marker for me. I thought I was doing well because I wasn't listening to secular music. I wasn't watching R-rated movies at the time. I thought, I'm not putting that stuff in here. I'm going to be pure, clean. Not smoking or drinking. That was easy for me. I thought that was the devil. Smoking and drinking. That's the worst thing you could do. That's by far the worst stuff you could do. And that's how I felt as a young Christian. That as long as I was not doing those things, that I was reaching the mark. That's the boundary I had set for myself. Those are the things I made sure weren't in my life. I was a Christian because I didn't do those things. But boundary markers can also be good things, just done for the wrong reason. For instance, this was a big one for me growing up in church. Raising my hands during worship became a boundary marker for me. I knew all the times where you're supposed to raise your hands during a song. Ooh, I had it down. All right, here we go. And chorus in 3, 2, 1. And then, it's not like I would look around to see who's looking, because I knew they were looking. I knew they were looking. And they knew I had it. I had it right when the passion hit. Boom. My hand went up. That chorus happened. Boom. And I had those boundary markers of this is what it takes to look like a Christian, to be a Christian. Reading the Bible. That sounds like something you can't mess up. If you read the Bible, that's it. Whether you do it, what kind of reason it is, you're doing it. Which, in a sense, that's kind of true. But I was reading the Bible so I wouldn't feel guilty about not reading the Bible. So I would be able to put the check mark and say, yep, Pastor, I've been reading my Bible this week. You ever been in that place where you tell your pastor, oh, yeah, guess what? I sat down. I read my Bible for 30 minutes today. You ever had a pastor go, good, that's good. Good job. You're doing it. Another thing was going to the altar. When I was a youth, that was super spiritual when you go to the altar. Yeah. And that's how I viewed it, is these boundary markers of this is being a Christian. This is being a Christian. Not necessarily loving God, not necessarily loving people, not doing it because I want to, not doing it because my heart is changed, not doing it because I have a desire, but doing it because I was raised in church and everyone's looking at me. And in order to change them and to change the people in my school, change the people I work with, I have to do these things. I have to reach these boundary markers. I have to pray out loud during church so that people know how spiritual I am, so that they know that I'm not praying. You know, I would give in the offering. I would give in the offering not necessarily because I was supposed to tithe, because the word told me to, because I knew that someone was on the other side seeing if I gave offering. I'm sure there was somebody, like a table of representatives, that every week talked about Jared Hutyra and decided how Christian he was based on what he gave. And I thought, they ain't going to get me because I'm going to give. That was a boundary marker for me. And even being kind to others became a boundary marker for me. Because I'll tell you right now, I'll be transparent. I don't always like people. I just don't. I've had a lot of bad and bitter interactions with people. And so by nature, whether I can blame it on Adam or not for the fall, I just don't like people, okay, most of the time. And when I became a Christian, that had to change. But I thought it had to change because I was a Christian, and that's it. Because I was a Christian, I have to start liking people and being nice to them. And so you think, whoa. Wait a second. Wait a second. You mean to tell me that you weren't actually transformed into a loving person? You were just nice because it was a way for them to think you were transformed? Bingo. And you think, what? How does that make sense? See, behavioral standards, doing the right thing at the right time, may identify who's in the club of Christianity, but they can also present a facade of pseudo-transformation, not a real thing, masking an unchanged life within, which is something I didn't realize was happening with me when I first became a Christian. I was doing these things that I thought were going to transform me. I thought doing these things and not doing certain things was how to be transformed. But ultimately, it was kind of just like spraying cologne on a turd. I mean, you're not going to make it better. It's not, if something's wrong in your, sorry, probably should use a different phrase there, but if something's wrong with the way you think, you can't change the way you think just by, okay, I'm going to start raising my hands at the right time during worship. That's not going to change who you are. Obviously, it's not like I was never genuine. I'm not trying to tell you I actually hate everyone all the time, and if I've ever been nice to you, it's been a lie. I'm not saying that, obviously. But it's just that often what I said and did on the outside is not what I actually felt on the inside. It wasn't genuine. You know, for instance, if someone were to critique my work and evaluate something I did, on the outside, I would say, okay, thank you. Thank you for telling me what I did wrong. I'll do it better next time. On the inside, I imagined punching them in the head and secretly planning on doing whatever it is, doing it wrong for the rest of my life just so it makes them mad. Like, that's what happens when someone critiques me. So you're like, I'm never telling you what you did wrong, Jared. Please do. I'm not actually like that. But that happened. That happened. When people would try to talk to me about things I didn't want to talk about, or there would be awkward conversations with people who are reacting to my stature, you know, on the inside, it was a completely different thing than on the outside. And I don't know what it is about working at a job, but how many of you are like me, and when your boss like tells you something you did wrong, your first instinct is like, okay, I quit. I don't know why that is. I don't handle being told when I'm doing wrong very well. So when my boss is like, okay, you need to do better on this, I'm done. And I don't know why that is. I think it's part of my nature to want to have everything in control. And I can control the boundary markers. I can control what I do. Somewhere in my life, the line between true transformation and a believable transformation became blurred. That line became blurred. Not just to others, but to myself. You know, many times in my life, I've genuinely believed that being the Jared that God called me to be was just about making sure I got all the I'm a Christian boxes checked off. I'm a Christian. And when we do that, the why of what we do and the how of what we do become two separate things. They stop being related to each other. As Christians, we do everything we do because of Jesus' perfect love for us. That's why we do everything we do. And yet, the how of being a Christian can easily become something totally separate from that. You know, we get so focused on how to be a Christian, what not to say, what not to do, what to say, when to do it, how to do it, that we find ourselves obsessing over if we're doing a good enough job of convincing everyone that we got it down. The longer we perceive our walk like this, the further those two concepts get from each other, the why we do it and the how we do it. Before long, it may not even matter to you why you do what you do as long as you do it well. And unfortunately, that's so true in a lot of churches, that it doesn't really matter why they're doing it. As long as they're doing it well, then they're doing their job. And we think like that as Christians sometimes. And being raised in church, I was always striving to be who I was supposed to be. And that's where I found myself. By getting everything right on the outside, I was hoping that everything on the inside would just kind of magically fix. By convincing others and myself that I was who I needed to be on the outside, I thought that becoming that on the inside was like a byproduct of getting everything right. But that's not how it works. Romans 12, 1-2 says this. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. When Paul writes about being morphed, transformed in Romans 12:2, he is giving us the key. It doesn't say transform yourself. He says be transformed. Some of you are like, what's the difference? The difference is we can't make transformation just happen, and especially not by just doing those things. You know, it's something that God does to us. But that doesn't mean we're off scot-free. It doesn't mean we can just say, okay, I believe in God, now transform me. This is what Paul says. He says, in order to be transformed, there has to be a renewing of our mind. Okay, well, what does that even mean? Our thinking must be changed. It must be transformed from old, ungodly ways into new, godly ways of thinking. What we know in our minds to be true forms a conviction in our hearts of that truth. And that conviction in our hearts translates into action. Therefore, we must first renew our minds. Okay, so how do we know if there is some thought process that needs to be renewed? If you have ever said, that's just how I am, ding, 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 that's you. If you've ever justified something in your life, a behavior, an action, by saying, that's just how I am, then you probably need some renewal in your mind. You're doing it wrong. And trust me, I'm really good at that game show. I'm a good contestant. I've used the phrase, "that's just how I am," so many times it's sad. And I never realized it until I got married. Until there was someone to respond to me saying that, and to respond to my "that's just how I am's" with, "well, stop that then, because that's stupid." You need someone in your life who's going to tell you that. From small things like being on my phone too much. And when my wife says, "What are you doing?" No, I'm just on my phone." "Who are you talking to?" "Nobody." "Well, then get off your phone." I'm like, "Why?" She's like, "'Cause life is happening before you." I'm like, that's just how I am, babe. I gotta. And she's like, "Well, stop. Stop that being how you are like that." From little things like that to, I have a problem with picking my fingers. And don't get my wife started, please. She hates it. She'll say, "You need to stop that." And I'll just say, "No, you don't understand. You don't understand. My dad, he picked out his fingers. My mom picked out her fingers. It's hereditary. It's a thing I can't control. I do it subconsciously." And she's like, yes, you can stop that. So don't give me that you can't control yourself. I just pick at my finger. I don't know what it is. And from little things like that to more deep-rooted things, like feeling like I'm not good enough to do something. Almost every time I preach, I say, "Destiny, I don't know why I told Pastor Gary I would preach. I can't preach." And every time she's like, "What? Are you dumb? You can preach." She's always there to tell me that I can do something. That there are things that I can set my mind to and accomplish them. And I always try to justify what I feel by saying, "Oh, no, you don't understand. I'm just being realistic. That's just how I am. I'm being realistic." I've had to learn to replace certain ways of thinking, and I've had to reprogram my brain. The only way to replace the error of the world's way of thinking is to replace it with God's truth. And the only infallible source of God's truth is his revealed word, the Bible. Transformation through renewed minds comes as believers expose themselves to God's word. But reading his word or studying a devotional or spending quiet time with him will not instantly lead to transformation if they just become boundary markers for you. If you're just doing them because you feel like that's what you're supposed to do and not because you desire to change. Something that God challenged me with this week, and I'm wrapping up, and something I believe that he wants to challenge you with is how willing are we to change? Because my wife will tell you I'm not very willing. And God, he sees in my life that there are things that I can very easily change that I'm just stubborn about. And so God posed this question to me: how willing are you to change, Jared? So I want us to ask that question. And I'm not talking about changing something exterior, because we could all probably win an Oscar on how to pass as a Christian. What I'm talking about is how willing we are to change how we think. To change those "that's just how I am's" to "this is who Christ called me to be." If your Christian walk has been a roller coaster, if your life often feels like a roller coaster, then you need a change on the inside so that what happens on the outside doesn't shake you and doesn't shape you. Because your identity is not based on your past. It's not based on your mistakes. It's not based on your sin. It's not even based on your success and your accomplishments. Your identity is not based on what your friends think of you, what random people think of you. It's not what other people say it is. It's not based on the outside. Your identity is not how you look or what you say or what you do. It starts on the inside of you. And in order for that identity to truly be what God has called you to be, we must allow him to transform us starting here and starting here. So I want everyone to stand. Ephesians chapter 4, starting at verse 22, says this. You were taught with regard to your former